הניסים ועל הברכן ועל הגבורות ועל התשועות ועל הנפלאות, על הניסים ועל הברכן ועל הגבורות ועל התשועות ועל הנפלאות שעשית לאבותינו בימים ההם בזמן הזה, בזמן הזה שעשית לאבותינו בימים ההם בזמן הזה.
Welcome to Jewish Life, a program presented in cooperation with the Jewish Community Relations Council of New York. I'm your host, Stewart Ain. Every week we present programs of particular interest to the Jewish community, and today we're going to be speaking about the Holocaust with Irving Roth. He's director of the Holocaust Center at Temple, Judea in Manhasset, New York. He's also a Holocaust survivor and who speaks frequently throughout the region and actually throughout the country. And welcome to the program, Irving.
Thank you very much. Thank you for inviting me.
Thank you. Thank you. I could have sworn you were on the show over the years, but I'm glad we're making up for my failure to get you on the program once before. So I'm glad you're here. You've been, as I mentioned, you talked to groups, you talked to youth groups, and you've been back to Europe. Am I right to talk?
Yes,
to them too?
I talked throughout the United States, and I talked to groups as the director of the center and as an educator. And the groups can be sixth graders or senior citizens and everything in between. I'm also involved with a number of organizations. One of them is, of course, March of the Living. So I've been to Poland many times with both students and adults. I also work very closely with an organization called Christians United for Israel, which is an organization at this point about 10 million people who are there to do good things for Israel, both financially and also politically in the American Congress and Senate.
When you talk to them about what it was like growing up under Nazi rule, now you turned to 91 in September of 2020, and you talked to them about being born in Czechoslovakia, then having to flee to Hungary. To talk about, can you just briefly talk a little bit about what you experienced there?
Certainly. Well, the first thing that I want to tell you, Czechoslovakia, when I was born and for the next 10 years after that, was a democracy, really mimicking America, the best of America. And therefore, as such, living in a small city of about 6,500 people, I went to the public school, I played soccer, I did everything that kids do with absolutely no restrictions of any kind, except those placed on me by my father and mother. But other than that, I had no problem with anything. But this all changed in 1939 when the Slovakia became an independent country and joined really Nazi Germany's persecution of Jews. And suddenly, here I am, it's 1939, the summer, and one morning I get up, and during the summer, normally I would play with other kids, go to the park, and that morning I couldn't go in because I was a Jew. It's a big sign. Right. And thus begins beginning of the end of the Jews of my town.
And your town had about a third of the town was Jewish.
The what?
About a third of your town was Jewish. Am I right?
Yes, a third of the town was Jewish.
Incredible.
But the persecution begins in 1939 in the summer, and it goes step by step. First, you can't go into the park, can't go to the beach. Eventually, you have to wear a yellow star. And
your father lost his job. He had a lumber company.
He had a lumber company, and of course, non-Jews could no longer, by 1940, Jews could no longer own businesses. So it's interesting what my father did is he asked one of his friends, one of his Christian friends, to take over the business pro forma. And he did. which meant that my father continued running it. Money was still made, so everything is okay, except for one small detail. A couple of months go by, and one day his friend walks into my father's office, says, "Hello, how are things?" "Great." He says, my father said to him, "I really appreciate what you're doing for me, that you allow me to do this, even though your name is on the business." He said, "Well, that's what I came to talk to you about. After all, it is my name. It is my business. But you're doing a good job running my company, so you can remain as a manager." So here's
And
a friend.
he continued to get paid, but he was telling him who's the boss now.
That's right. Who takes the profits?
Yes.
So you begin to see transformation. When I
People that
started,
you grew up with, he had been his employee before. Am I right?
what's that?
He had been his employee
No,
previously?
no. He
Oh,
was
I see. Just a friend.
He was a friend. In fact, my father and he worked as young people for a large lumber company.
I see.
So they were really the business managers of a large company. My father and him shared the job of running it.
Yes.
It's a multi-million-dollar business. And so I knew his children, played with them. So, it was a person you knew. So the transformation.
How about the
people.
kids? The kids you played with,
Ah.
his kids, did they change too?
Absolutely. And let me give you the actual event. When I started school, first grade, in my class were boys and girls. It happens to be the most gorgeous girl that I've ever seen in my life was in my class. She turned out to be Russian Orthodox, different from Jewish Orthodox that I was. So there were times I carried her books. We did homework together. No problem. And comes 1940, she says, "I don't want to talk to you because you're a Jew. My father told me not to be friendly with a Jew because the Jews are evil and socially totally unacceptable to have a Jewish friend." So it's a transformation, a change that takes place in the moral and ethical aspects of people. They buy into
and the Nazi propaganda. This was
pure propaganda, Nazi propaganda. By the way, there were no Germans per se in Slovakia. There were no German soldiers. There was no German administration. This was the Slovak administration.
And just ate it up. Just ate it up.
Yeah,
And
with their president, who happened to have been a Roman Catholic priest.
what was it that, Hitler comes to power in January of 1930. So now this is 10 years have gone by. He
Correct.
started going after the Jews almost as soon as he took
That's
power.
correct.
People had told me in the streets of Germany, you knew that there was a change within
That's
months.
correct. But
Within months.
but in Germany, from 1933 until 1939, Czechoslovakia was still a country, an independent country, a democracy, hoping and praying that nothing will happen. But of course, in 1938, Germany says to Czechoslovakia, "I want a piece of you." And Chamberlain flew to Munich, and everything was wonderful. They signed a piece of paper.
Right.
It was worth less than the paper it was written on.
Sure.
So by 1939, see, Slovakia always had a Nazi party. It was called the Hlinka Party. So they managed, once Germany took off part of Czechoslovakia, they immediately began to be very vociferous and basically created a new state. And it was an anti-Semitic state.
So your parents decided to go to Hungary.
Well, it didn't happen till a bit later. What
Right.
happened is that, of course, Germany took over Poland in 1939 and etc. And by the time that 1941 comes along, June of 41, most of Europe is controlled by Germany and its allies, which means Hungary, Slovakia, Italy, and so on. And every place they go, the anti-Jewish laws. But in 1942, January 20th, there's a conference, as you know,
Oh,
the Wannsee Conference, and the decision is to get rid of the Jews of Europe. And so the next major issue takes place in my city in the middle of the night, in the summer of 1942, knock on every Jewish home, and 90% of the Jews, 1,800 human beings, are taken from their home into the synagogue.
this is in Kosik.
This
Is
is
that
in
the-
Humanet. It's
Okay.
in Humanet.
So, right.
And now, now the synagogue was a lovely place, but it only said about 450 people.
Yeah.
Now you have 1,800. And of course, in those days, the bathroom was not inside the building.
Mhm.
There was no running water. There's certainly no air conditioning. So mind you, there are 1,800 people in this small space with not allowed to go out to the bathroom.
What month is it?
This is in end of June, beginning of July.
Okay, so it's summertime.
It's summertime.
Right. Warm. Hot.
And, it's hot. And there's no water running. There's no bathrooms. And the Jews are there for 36 hours. After 36 hours, the doors are opened up and under guard march to the railroad station. And of course, at the railroad station are cattle cars.
Yes.
Now, there were 2,000 Jews living in this city, but only 1,800 were taken away. There were a number of people who were left there because they were still part of the economy. So on a temporary basis, Jews were left there. For instance, the chief engineer for the city was a Jew. So you had to keep him until you get another chief engineer. My father was still running Albert's business. So he was still needed. So my family is saved. Unfortunately, a few months go by, and one morning, interestingly enough, I was in synagogue in shul with my grandfather, which is not unusual for my grandfather to be there every morning and every night. So I used to go with him because it was much more fun than going with my father. With my father, I had to sit next to him and pray. With my grandfather, I could play, meet my friends, I learned very early in life that grandparents are so much easier to manipulate than parents.
And you're 12 years old at the time. You weren't bar
Yeah,
mitzvah.
I'm
Right.
now, it's 1942, I'm 10 years old. And a few months go by, and one day as we coming out of the synagogue after the morning service, policeman is there and arrests my grandfather.
Yes.
Simultaneously, my grandmother is arrested to make sure that nobody communicates with anybody else, to make sure they get both of them. Now, obviously, we go into panic mode, make phone calls, pay people off, and my grandparents are let out. Now, it becomes obvious that this is unhealthy, dangerous.
Now you had
So
tried to
we-
get out. You had tried way back when you tried to leave and go to America. And what happened?
1939, and we got all the papers,
Right.
and we're on the list. But there was a slight delay.
6
of
years.
6 years. So it's a small detail.
Uh.
Remember, America was closed, particularly to Jews. I think that's another conversation we can have separate from this. And so we're stuck there. So the family decides that the only thing to do is to escape. Where do you go? Where the Jews are still at home. That's Hungary. Because by 1942, when the Slovak Jews are being shipped to Auschwitz and Treblinka and other places, where the Polish Jews are being murdered, when the German Jews have been shipped to Poland, it's 1942, and the German army is making tremendous progress. They're deep into the Soviet Union. They already been murdered over 500,000 Jews in the Soviet Union, and things are working fine. The problem was that recognizing that just killing people by machine gun takes a lot of effort and money and bullets. And if they want to achieve their goal to make all of Europe Judenrein, free of Jews, the rate at which they're going, it's going to take them 10 years. That is why the Wannsee Conference. And so that's why the Jews of Europe. Now, Hungary, though they were anti-Semitic from its get-go, already in 1920, I tell people the first anti-Jewish law after World War I that was passed was in Hungary. It was 1920s. And the law said that only 2% or 3% of the universities students can be Jews.
Jewish, right?
Yeah. Okay. So, but rather than shipping the Jews in 1942, they decided in 1941, since they were at war, they needed manpower. So what they did is took the Jewish men in the ages of 18 and 60 and put them into a slave labor force, attached them to the army. So you have all these thousands of Jewish men.
Right.
Couple
This
of
is in Hungary
100,000.
now. Right.
That's in Hungary. And they ship them with the Hungarian army to the front line in the Soviet Union. Terrible conditions. One of the jobs they had, of course, was to march in front of tanks and find the mines. And that was a perfectly wonderful thing. Why? Because if they didn't disarm the mine and it blew up, they killed the Jew, but the tank was safe. The families were left at home. That they were going to take care of at the end of the war when they win. So Hungary becomes safe haven.
Yes.
So in 1943, I arrived at my family in Hungary. My brother and I and my grandparents stay in a small village with my aunt and uncle who live in that village. And my parents have to get a job. So they're off to Budapest. So 1943 goes over. By the end of 1943, the American army has occupied most of Italy. Things are looking up. The German army is being pushed back from Stalingrad. Things are looking up. And I'm at home, sleeping in my own bed, living in my aunt's house, who is a wonderful person, who is gentle and sweet. My parents are in Budapest, therefore there's very little control. So I have a good time. But in the spring of 1944, Hungary decides that it too will get rid of its Jews. Again, we have to understand that at the point of spring of 1944, the government of Hungary changes. The Nyilas party, the Nazi party, becomes the dominant party. And with the help of Eichmann and 250 of his Gestapo, the Jews of Hungary, in 53 days, are put into cattle cars to Auschwitz. 437,000 Jews in 53 days. I am one of those Jews. My grandparents, aunts, uncles, my parents are in Budapest. I have no idea what's happening to them. And that's when I arrive in Auschwitz, the spring of 1944.
Not that many people actually walked out of Auschwitz at the end, did it? Do you remember what the numbers were?
What's
How many
that?
actually survived? How many actually survived at the end?
Well, this is what happened. About 1.1 to 1.2 million Jews were brought to Auschwitz. At the time when the forced marches, the death marches
Yes,
began,
death marches. Yeah.
there were 60,000. Because the objective was very clear. Bring the Jews there, murder them, and keep some necessary to run the camps and do some work. If you have, because near Auschwitz, actually as part of Auschwitz, there was a factory built by the German government for IG Farben, where slave labor was part of the deal. So some of those survived. Elie Wiesel was there, among others.
Yes.
See, people sometimes don't understand. In the Auschwitz area, there were many camps. There were 3 major camps. Auschwitz I,
Yes.
which was a slave labor camp. Auschwitz II, which was a death camp, where the 4 major crematoria and gas chambers were. And there was a third one, where, as I say, the factory. It's called Buna. That factory produced synthetic rubber. Now, the company IG Farben did pay the German government for the work that the Jews did. Effectively, they paid 1 or 1.5 marks for a day for an unskilled laborer.
How much does that come out to?
I don't know, 50 cents?
Pennies.
Pennies, literally pennies.
Yeah, sure.
But for that, of course, they provided lodging and food. Of course, when we speak of the lodging, it's not exactly the
Waldorf.
no, none of that. It was really triple-decker wooden structures. And if you're lucky, you got some straw to make it softer. And the food consisted of some black liquid in the morning, some soup at noon, and a piece of bread at night. About 350, 400 calories.
So January 18th, 1945, what happens?
You know, I work in the fields, I drain the swamps and do all that day after day. And of course, the Russian front is getting closer. And so there is hope. On the 18th of January, we get up like every other morning, you know, standing formation inside the camp. The doors are opened up, a bunch of guards. And then we figure we're going back to our stables to take care of the horses. But we're not. We're going in a different direction. And thus begins 3 days of death march.
Right.
What that really means in simple English, you march or you shot. By the third day, you couldn't go 50 feet not to see a body on the floor in the snow with a red splotch around it.
How many were on a death march when he started? Do you know?
We started with 60,000 people.
Oh, on this last death march, 60,000.
On the last death march,
right.
60,000. Probably 1/3 arrived wherever. I arrived with my brother in Buchenwald. And Buchenwald was a concentration camp. They did not have a gas chamber. It did have crematoria, but no gas chamber. But originally, Buchenwald was built in 1937 for 5,000 prisoners. But now you have people from the various camps in the east crowding the German concentration camp. So now the food became a much larger problem. A place where it used to be 5,000, now there are 50,000 people.
50,000, yes, yes. This
So
was
now,
a place right after Kristallnacht. This is where they put the Jews, and then they let them go, most of them.
right, not,
right.
mind you, at the beginning there were 5,000, now there are 50,000. Yes.
Right.
And the amount of food is like, if you're lucky, you wind up with a boiled potato every day, but not every day. Some days you got nothing. Some days, on very rare occasions, you got some hot soup, which mostly cabbage.
Mm-hmm.
And I also point out that standing in line for the soup, you had to be very clever in a way, because when you have a barrel of soup, the upper part is just water.
Oh, right.
The lower part has some cabbage in it. The problem is that if you stand too far back, they'll be out of it. So I had to stand at the right place at the right time to even get soup.
Right, right, right. Finally, April 10th comes. What happens?
By April 10th, well, before April 10th, my brother was taken away. And so now I'm 15 and a half years old. I'm in a camp with 50,000 people. I don't know most of them. I know about from my town, no. Certainly, or a friend, you know, and I'm alone. But I'm trying to survive. April 10th comes along, and they really earlier than that begins death marches again. And so I've been on the death march. Now, mind you, by the time April comes along, I'm down to about 80 pounds or so. I'm skin and bones because a boiled potato every day or every second day and some soup, it's a little worse than the Pritikin diet. And so, but I know what the death march is. I've been on one from Auschwitz to Buchenwald.
Sure.
So I don't want to go. So I hide. The 10th of April, I'm hiding under the buildings, in the latrine, wherever. On the 10th of April, we're hiding under a building in a crawl space, a number of us. But a guard comes along with a dog and begins to bark. He knows somebody's there, says, crawl out or I'll shoot you. We crawl out, standing in front of the gate. There are 10,000 Jews there in front of that gate. Guards begin to come. And suddenly the siren goes off. We wait a few moments. The American airplanes are overhead. They're bombing the city of Weimar, which is like 3 miles away.
Had you heard the sirens before?
Yeah, I've heard them in Auschwitz.
Right.
And
but not
I can
in
explain
Buchenwald.
that, but not in Buchenwald. So this is the first time in Buchenwald. Now, of course, what happens? What happens is the guards don't want to get killed. So if they would march out with the Jews, the guys in the planes would see marching people. They think it's an army. They bomb them. They were not in the business of getting killed. They locked the doors, and we're standing there. The air raid lasted all day long. Too late to start the death march. I'm back in my barracks. Next morning, they're beginning to call a roll call, or appel as it's called, but it's not as organized as the day before, or the day before. By 11 o'clock in the morning or 12 o'clock in noon, all the guards inside and outside of the camp, in the guard towers, disappeared. And 3 o'clock in the afternoon, 2 American soldiers walked into my barracks. Now, I remember the moment, of course, because it was like from death to life. 2 healthy young men. It turns out one was black and one was white. And they walked in, and we were all kids in one of the barracks. And they broke down. What did they see? They see 250, 300 kids, average weight 75, 80 pounds. Average age is like 15 and a half or 16. Only in the moment.
And you guys were what, lying on the beds?
Lying on the beds, and as they came in, we got out of the beds.
And there are how many on the bed? Each bed? 4? 3?
Oh, no. What happened, there were 4 layers.
Yes, right.
4 layers, and were side by side. In fact, in Buchenwald, oftentimes, we were so packed closely that everybody had to face in the same direction. Because if one person turned, everybody else had to turn. I mean, it's, the numbers, there were 700-800 people in the barracks. And within a matter of 3-4 hours, a Jeep comes down, and in the Jeep are some huge vats. They look like big cans. They tell us to bring our little bowl and they feed us.
Food, right.
All we want. So what happened, we all picked out. Where we spent the whole night. Getting stuff from the top and from the bottom.
Right.
But fortunately, within a matter of a very short period of time, more American soldiers came in, the doctors came in, and began the process of trying to rehabilitate us.
After the liberation from Buchenwald, you eventually make your way to the States, and you start a new life here with a new family. And you told me that you're starting to see now in the public discourse, you're hearing things you've heard before from the public leaders, is it?
Pretty much the same. Now, I suggest that the Holocaust was a step-by-step process. It began with words. Already in the late 1890s, 1880s, books and pamphlets are being distributed throughout Germany, France, and other places. There's some infamous people like a fellow by the name of Treitschke, who was a member of parliament in Germany, the Reichstag, in the 1890s, writes a pamphlet, What to Do with the Jews. And he comes up with a particular sentence as, the Jews are our misfortune, which eventually becomes the Nazi slogan, which is published every time the newspaper comes out, the Stürmer, on top is the Stürmer, and the bottom is that.
Mm-hmm.
So it already begins there. World War I comes along. Of course, Jews are part of the Austrian army, the Hungarian army, as my father was. By the way, my father spent 4 years on the Russian front. First as a lieutenant, and when he finished his career as a soldier in 1919, he was a major, a decorated soldier by the Austro-Hungarian army.
Right, decorated. Totally.
I mean,
yes. Yes.
Okay. But Germany loses the war, in spite of my father's heroics. The problem is, how do you explain the best equipped, the most sophisticated army losing a war? It cannot be. What happened, according to Adolf Hitler and his 6 other friends, and I'll come to that, somebody had to betray Germany. The Jews. They've been betraying us, they've been using us, they've been swindling us, all the things they've been doing, and during the war they betrayed us.
You just have to pick a scapegoat, and what the Jews were the ones who, over the years, over the centuries, had been the
for
scapegoat.
2,000 years. For 2,000 years.
So it was a natural pick.
Right. I mean, it's a natural thing because that's been all along. I mean,
Exactly.
People forget that anti-Semitism, and I hate the word anti-Semitism because that's a euphemism for the hatred of the Jews. And so 7 people, 1920 get together. Adolf Hitler is one of them. And they have a plan. The plan consists of many things, and they very clearly state in an article in 1920, Jews are our misfortune, we need to get rid of him. 7 people begin the Nazi Party. It's around 1920. End of 1932 is an election in Germany. The Nazi Party gets more votes than anybody else. 32 or 33% of the German people voted for the Nazi Party. And by the way, in no time during the whole period did they in any way hide the fact that we're going to get rid of the Jews. 1925, when Adolf Hitler was in jail, he wrote a book.
He wrote the book,
called
Mein Kampf. Still published today.
Yes, My Struggle, or putting it into slightly different language, Jihad. Mein Kampf.
Right.
Okay, so Germany now, they had an agreement at Versailles that they will not have an army. They will not build armaments. So obviously there are hundreds of thousands of people in Germany who have no jobs because they were in the army. They knew how to fight, how to drill, so thousands, hundreds of thousands of people out of a job. Plus 1929 is a depression, a world depression.
Mm-hmm.
People are not too happy. A wonderful opportunity for somebody to come in. I will fix everything. You will have jobs. If I use the American expression, a car in every garage and a chicken in every pot. And we are the best. You Germans are the best.
And we were wronged in World War One. It wasn't, this is not what we bargained for, right?
Right.
They treated us so
And
badly.
not only that, he tells all the members of the armed forces who have no jobs, you will have jobs because we're going to reinstate the army. We'll tear up the Versailles Treaty. So that's what happened there. And it then continues. The next thing that happens, from the words come slogans. Slogans create words.
That's our friend that's Goebbels.
I mean, Goebbels, from slogans go action. From action comes murder.
Yes.
And the most horrific part of the murder is that it was not a crime. It was not a sin. It was patriotism. It was glorious to murder people. It's a total transformation of morality. Not only was it not immoral to build gas chambers for Jews, it was patriotic. World War II is over. I wind up in America. I go to school. I'm drafted into the US Army. I come back. US Army gives me money to go to school. I become an engineer. I have a family. Move out to Long Island. Things are quite wonderful. But what happened before, I still remember. And along comes 1945, 48 rather, a new country is born called Israel. And 5 armies attack it. Miraculously, Israel survives. The Arabs are not happy about that. So they have another war. Around 2000, they all had propaganda. They wrote a narrative. And why do you write a narrative? Is to tell your people they're the victims and tell the world that they're victims. The Jews are the Goliath and we are the David. They're evil. They chased us out. They took away our homes. They raped our women. They mixed this up. But in 2001, I believe, there was a conference in Durban, South Africa. It had to do with the fact that the UN, it's under UN sponsorship, what they're going to have is a conference on prejudice by racism. But that's not what happened. What happened is it was a hate fest against the Jews at the UN conference and out on the streets, propaganda against the Jews. Israel is an apartheid state. Israel practices genocide. And from then till now, 20 years later, a professor in universities in the United States who teach this propaganda, these lies. There are organizations in the United States, organization in a college campus. There is an idea to try and destroy Israel every which way. One of them is to boycott, divestment, and sanctions. The slogan is, from the river to the sea, Palestine will be free, which means no Jews will be alive. This organization is supported by millions of people in America. Now, members of Congress of the United States today, and continue being, who believe
in BDS.
BDS is right.
Yes.
They're not in any way told that it's wrong. Members of Congress, I'm not saying to them, I'm not going to put you on a committee. No, they wind up on the Appropriation Committee. They wind up on the Defense Committee. So people will tell you, oh, there are only 5 or 6 of them or so, maybe 7, maybe 4. Why worry? I remind people that the Nazi Party in Germany in 1920 had 7 members. Unfortunately, people don't understand this. Now, I speak in universities and colleges and churches throughout the United States. At one university, I'm giving a talk on my experience. I'm not talking about Israel yet, because I do, but I'm talking about my experience, what happened to me. In the middle of my talk, a woman jumps up and screams at me, "How many Arab children did you murder this week? How many women did you rape this week?" This is one of the most prestigious universities in America.
And she's a student.
What's that?
And she is a student.
No,
She's
she was not a
there?
student. She was
Oh,
a
she was
member
not
of
a
the faculty.
faculty. Oh,
I mean, this is, and that's not once, many times. And one needs to work with that, which I do. And, you know, I generally listen and I say, okay, that's a very interesting narrative. But I have a narrative too. Mine is different. So why don't we ignore the narrative and go to facts? No, Israel did not attack 5 Arab armies on May 14, 1948. That's not what happened, although you believe it. The Jews did not go from house to house and threw you out and took away and raped. Not true. That didn't happen. I say, if it would have happened, there would be someplace, at least one photograph of that. Maybe a foot of film. Nothing. But what's interesting is they managed to show it on video. Al Jazeera has one of those, it's about 3 hours, called Nekba. We have explosions.
yeah.
Well,
Made
if you
up.
see people, explosions, must be the Jews.
Right. There's no other faculty member sitting there saying she's wrong, defending you, supporting you. They all just sit there and accept her? No.
No. I was in Hungary giving a bunch of lectures at the university in Debrecen. And they knew that I'm coming, you know, it was through the Hungarian education department. And so I was asked if I would stop by and talk to about a couple of 100 kids at something called the American Corner. It's an interesting, there's a library and so on and so forth.
Okay.
I said, I'm here. I traveled 5,000 miles, of course. And I'm giving this talk on my experience. And at the end of it, I say, you know, any questions? Hand goes up. And he says, you speak as if you're an eyewitness, but you're not. I said, okay, what do you mean by that? Well, if there were gas chambers, and if you were in a gas chamber, you wouldn't be here talking to me. So obviously there were no gas chambers. It's the party line. And I know there's one more question is going to come after. Now, here is one guy, there are 200 kids there. I explain how I know. How we know the documentation, how much Zyklon B gas in canisters was brought to Auschwitz to murder the Jews. Tons.
And you saw the smoke.
And I
coming
see
out
the
of the
smoke.
chimney,
And I
and you
came to
smelled it.
Auschwitz, and came up to Auschwitz, my grandfather, and he disappeared. Of the 4,000 people that came on my transport from Hungary, that within 24 hours, 300 of us were still alive. They disappeared. They all suddenly got malaria or some other sickness and they died. And you didn't want to spread the malaria or whatever other sickness or cholera, so you burned the bodies, right? No, I didn't speak to him because he didn't hear a word I said. But the other 300 people, or 299, heard me. But I knew there's another question. Second question. What do you think of the fact that Israel is an apartheid state and practices genocide? So I asked him to define genocide, which, by the way, he did not know what it meant. This is not an unusual thing, but both from teachers, professors, but I must say so far, not that many professors. You know, there are 5,000 universities and colleges in America, and 200 of them have organizations and that hate Jews, that pick on Jews, that harass Jews, particularly if any student says anything positive about Israel, he gets harassed. So you have the problem of the university. Then you have another group of people called the media. They find the most craziest things in the world. Now, if you look at places like Egypt, look like Gaza, Syria, the Christian population is 10 to 15% what it was 15, 20 years ago. In Israel, it's growing. Yet, there's an article. No, it wasn't an article. I think it was NPR had a program. But they figured out how to use that idea that people in Gaza, Christians in Gaza, are being persecuted. It's the fault of Israel. Why? Well, because Israel is blockading Gaza, which means they can't get the concrete to build the tunnels, to destroy Jewish homes, Jewish people. And since Israel is a Goliath, Israel is at fault. Now, this is NPR.
And of course, there have been negotiations for quite I'm thinking months, maybe even longer, to try to convince the leaders in Gaza, to release the two bodies of Israeli soldiers who were killed during the last fighting, and there was, I thought there were two people who wandered in who had mental problems, and they're alive, and Israel has tried to negotiate, and they're saying, look, there's a COVID outbreak. 48% of the people who've been tested are coming back positive. The thing is, they say Gaza is the crowded place in the world. It has the more COVID cases per capita than any other place in the world. And the Gaza leaders refused. And they said, Israel said, we'll help you. We'll give you the vaccine. We'll work with you. And they refuse. Just they want to hold on to these two bodies.
No, people think it's all about land. It's absolutely nothing to do with land. The objective is the destruction of the Jewish state and Jewish people with it. That's the point. They're not interested in build, and in a sense, I can understand it from the perspective of the leadership. They don't want a state, really. When you have a state, if I'm the prime minister, I'm accountable, even for the money. Now, the moment you have a controller, I can't take the money that I get from the UN and every place else and take 20% for myself and the rest of them distribute to my friends. Can't do that. So who the hell wants a state? Where is the that's where I believe is the biggest problem. And they have keep publishing and keep screaming all this propaganda, all these lies, and people buy into it. Just read an article by a gentleman who is an American, lives in Israel, was a member of Knesset. He read the book by a past president and goes through it. Falsehoods, propaganda, throughout the whole thing. The whole chapter on issues. Well, he's not the first president who's done something like that. We have another gentleman still alive, Mr. Carter, who, by the way, coined the word apartheid in his book. So one can see
Call from Alan Linden.
what the real problems are.
Call
You have to get
from
that?
Alan Linden.
So the problem is that the media and some figures of consequence who we trust, who are people to be admired, either don't understand any history, or the other alternative, which is even worse. And that's the scary part to me. We have people in Congress today who want to destroy the Jewish people. We have the media, which any time, take a country like Israel, the people. They started coming there. They always lived there. Jewish presence in Israel, in that area, in what called Palestine, that the Romans named it, because it was called Judea. The Jews always lived there. But it was a desolate place. I suggest they read the article by one of the American writers when he was there in the 1890s or so. It was a desolate land, swamps, hillsides covered in rocks. Today, it's a flourishing place. It's green. Where the sand dune used to be, now it's called Tel Aviv, one of the most modern cities in the Middle East. Now, when you have, normally us humans tend to look at a person or a group of people that pulls itself up by its own bootstraps and comes from the malaria-ridden place 100 years ago to a flourishing place to admire. Not so. Everybody in the world is admired for such activity, except the Jews. This is, my friend, anti-Semitism at its worst, the hatred of the Jew. So the question is why? Why is that so? Well, maybe I thought about it a lot. Not how it happened, but why it's happening now. Part of it could be a psychological problem. And the psychology goes like this. For 2,000 years, we were able to beat on the Jews anytime, any place we wanted. Blame them for every single thing that is happening which is bad in the world. And all of a sudden, they have an army, navy, and air force. They're fighting back. What chutzpah do Jews have? They cannot swallow that. I think that's somehow assimilated from generation to generation. As who was that? I think it was Menachem Begin said, they get it through their mother's milk. I mean, and the problem, another piece of the problem, the American Jews don't understand it. They don't see it. They do not see that. They don't see what I see. In 2015, there was an agreement made between 5 or 6 nations and Iran. Wait a minute. They're building missiles, guided missiles, that are capable of putting in not just an ordinary war, but a nuclear warhead. They're working on that. And we're going to take money that we're holding in escrow and ship it to them. Now, what does that do? What it does, it increases their economy. The folks who don't like the regime now get paid. So everything is fine. You're feeding, you're empowering the Iranian regime and the Turkish regime in the help to destroy the Jewish state. That's what you're doing. It's
And it
not
was a finite agreement. The agreement that they would not make nuclear weapons, it expired
but
after so many years.
Yeah, that's why the reason they're not going to use it for anything, that's what they're putting a nuclear facility 100 meters underground.
Right.
I mean, I remember when Chamberlain went to Munich. You know, there is a fellow who is considered to be pretty smart. You may have heard of him, Albert Einstein. You know what he said? If you do the same thing again and again, you'll get exactly the same results. People who think, and this is his words, people who think they can do the same thing and get a different result are crazy. How do people not see that? It's so frustrating. And I speak to people about it. I give talks on it. And some people say, "No, yeah, but it's different." No, it's not. I claim that the human being hasn't changed in the last 5,000 years. We still love and hate. We still are jealous. We still want to. We're the only creature on this earth that puts a fence around his coconut tree. We haven't changed. Each one of us wants to amass as much material as possible. We have not changed. And we are all susceptible to propaganda. One of the problems I find, not by profession, I'm an engineer. When you're an engineer, you have a problem to solve. So what do? You look at the problem and you try to analyze it, what's going on. And then you say, okay, I'm going to try and solve this problem. So what do? You look at various options, how you can go about solving it. And choose the one which is most probable will succeed. It will also have some negatives, because every one of those options has some negative and some positive. We have a fancy name for that called the benefit to cost ratio. This is what you do as an engineer. The other thing you do is say, okay, let us say that we're going to follow this path. And that's what you do with each one of the ideas. What if it's all successful? Will it lead to a solution? And will it lead to a solution which has a minimum amount of bad things and a maximum of right things? You take the equation and you go to the end. If you keep giving money to Iran, now they will cheat, as they have been all along since the agreement. What they actually did is, the expression is the negotiation in 2015, they kicked the can down the road. After all, some of the restrictions are coming to an end.
Yes.
Meanwhile, they are supporting and supplying weapons advanced weapons to terrorists. They are building missiles that can take a nuclear warhead. That's fine because there's no restriction on that. I don't understand how intelligent people with PhDs, with business acumen, with political figures who achieve the greatest power in the world don't see this. How is that possible?
Well, listen, it's been a great half hour. Thank you so much. Irving Roth, he's a Holocaust survivor, and he's talking to us about some of the lessons he's learned and how he can apply them to today. And fascinating. Thank you so much, Irving. Good to talk to you.
My pleasure. Thank you for
Until next week.
this morning.
Thank you.
Till next week.
Thank you.
Take
This
care.
is Stewart Ain for Jewish Life. Have a good day.